tree committee coming?
I think they ended up relying on the council liaison and the staff liaison to carry their message. So I
Okay.
incorporated it into the staff report,
Okay.
but I thought they might come
Well, they
also, but
Might. I don't know.
on the council liaison and the staff liaison to carry their message. So I incorporated it into the staff report.
Thank you for that, for repeating that message.
I try to do that everywhere I go, speak and then have it.
I thought somebody was on Zoom there for a second. I'm like, what the heck?
That'd be
Yeah,
great. That'd be
me
great
too.
at home to do that. Just I can have it just go
Mhm.
over all speakers. Yeah.
So I think that this information has been shared with you all before. It's the FAQs on Measure 5 and 50 from LOC.
Yeah.
It was reviewed by their attorneys in March of 23, but nothing has changed. So it was really, I pulled this off the web because I'm having to inform myself on what Measure 5 and 50 really did and why so many of our cities and governments, not just cities, but governments are struggling throughout Oregon. So that was one of the questions and one of the things that I was sort of able to talk about with community members on Tuesday.
It's a really confusing.
It's very confusing. It is extremely confusing. And I don't know if it was in here or something else that I read, that prior to Measure 5 and 50, all of our properties were assessed every 6 years. Once Measure 5, I believe it was Measure 5 went in place, those assessments were frozen. So if you had just been assessed, if you were early in that 6 year or late, whichever, if you had just been assessed, your assessed value on your home was frozen there. If you hadn't been assessed for 6 years, your property value was frozen there, which is why you can have houses, similar houses on the
With
same
wildly
lot
different,
with wildly different tax assessments.
Which isn't an equitable system in any.
no,
Well, it really kind of separated
It-
and
It's, yeah, it's
separated
very
those two
different.
things. Yeah.
Depended on when you built a lot of the time.
Well, it could be when you built, it
Or
could
just-
be,
Because
you know,
we haven't been assessed out here in a long time, and then we were about, what, years ago.
I think so.
They came around and assessed again.
Yeah,
but
it does depend on the county.
I just had the same conversation with Grandpa. He showed me the property tax bill and said, look at how much the city of Coburg takes. Why are they having revenue trouble? And I said, well, Grandpa, you have to remember that. Well, it looks like a lot on paper, but we don't keep. But a small portion
You
of
have to
that.
look at the breakdown,
Right.
which is on the side. And so the portion that Coburg or any city takes is a very small
Yes.
percentage of
And I
total tax.
spent a great deal of time explaining that to him
Good for you.
because it is confusing.
It is very confusing.
You look at the number and I think it was 800 something dollar amount, but the city keeps, I think, 3% of that by law.
It's 3% of
Yeah.
the assessed value
Yeah.
can go up every year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's not very much at all.
No, and,
live streaming, man.
oh, thank you.
Oh.
I apologize for that.
I was waiting for that.
Oh, I was not paying attention. I call the work session, city council work session for the city of Coburg to order at 6:03. Thank you. Will you please do roll call? I was paying no attention to you. I apologize for that.
Counselor Bowman,
Here.
Counselor Lyman,
Here.
Mayor Bell,
Here?
Counselor Smith,
Here.
Counselor Myers,
Here.
Counselor Engelbretson, and Counselor Wells are absent. We do have a quorum.
Thank you. And special guest tonight could be the Park and Tree Committee, but as Mr. Hanks said, I think that it will probably be our staff liaison and our council liaison that are presenting for the Park and Tree Committee. Work sessions are intended, I apologize, for information gathering, staff presentations, and preliminary discussions. Council does not take formal or final action on any matters. So I just want to remind you all of that. So Mr. Hanks and Counselor Smith, are you ready to talk about the Pavilion Park project summary and renaming process?
Sure. Yeah, the Park and Tree Committee recommendations are kind of a subset of this entire conversation. So I'll note those when we get to that spot. And just for clarity, as I originally thought that these would be three distinct agenda items, really 1 and 2 kind of morphed together, and the staff report covers 1 and 2 together. So we'll talk about those as a group. And then the final item is in your packet, the new neighborhood park engagement plan is the memo, separate memo at the very end of the packet. So the packet contains a staff report for tonight's meeting, and then 5 attachments that are from prior. Those are all from prior meetings. They're just kind of a for the record kind of stuff. They're not anything we necessarily will hit heavy on today at all. But it kind of is background material to what I hit in the staff report that we'll cover today. So tonight is kind of an as promised work session topic to come back and provide council and the community with an update, kind of the final tally of the Pavilion Park project. We're pretty much at a completion. It was ribbon cutting, in June, and we knew post ribbon cutting that we still had a few things to do and tidy up, and we have kind of a side project list that is really more of ongoing operations and maintenance now, separate from capital. But this was the opportunity to kind of recap council on the project and kind of the final numbers. And then it also, as I said, incorporates several recommendations that relate to one particular amenity of the project that Park and Tree has spent considerable time discussing, and we've had some recommendations to forward along. So with that, I'll just quickly go through it. Most of this is all stuff that we've talked about multiple times. This just happens, to be the finale of it. Quick background, the Pavilion Park improvement project I put in the staff report began in 2022 with the application. It really was 2020-21 where, committee and staff conversation got going on the potential for purchasing or acquiring the land immediately adjacent to Pavilion Park that was kind of used for park purposes, I understand, sort of, but it was not under city ownership. So this project did a couple things. It formalized that by acquiring that property. So all the way from the Ryan Thomas building to McKenzie Street is now city property, and had a large improvement project that was predominantly funded by Oregon Parks and Recreation Department grant. And that was really about the focus of the grant was ADA improvements, and basically, the idea of ensuring that the park system is able to be accessed and used by all. So the project layout, I just go through the staff report. Some of this is grabbed from it was broken into 2 phases. Phase 1 was completed in May of 24, and the primary piece of that one was the precast, pre-constructed restroom building that was placed. A lot of pre-work done by our staff to prep the site for that and get the septic and utilities ready. And then that building was landed really nicely on the pad, and it worked out really well. 2-stall restroom, which I know was in discussion from early about 1 stall versus 2, stick built versus precast. From an operations and long-term maintenance, that is as close to a bulletproof public facility as you're going to find. Nothing's bulletproof. I think we know that, but very sturdy, very low maintenance for ongoing parks budgeting.
Can I just interrupt
Yeah.
and make sure that for the record that council Counselor Engelbretson has arrived.
So that plus some pre-utilities kind of wrapped up the first season of the project. And then phase two was more of the bid, contracted out bid to do all of the landscape architects' designs, the pathways, the electrical, the lighting, the mounding, all the plantings, irrigation extension, et cetera, and the ADA parking and all the concrete that went with that. So that's outlined here. Then, as we talked about in last September, those bids, very competitive bidding, came in still beyond the grant funded portion of the project, and had a conversation with council about, do we move forward or do we regroup? And at that point it was yes, move forward. In red there, that table is taken right out of the September staff report and decision making of council to move forward with the bid. And so we did, and that was kicked off in late fall, and it worked through the winter, took a little hiatus for 6 or 8 weeks, and then hit it back at the beginning of spring and met our target of being open and available for a wedding. I think was the very first thing we were crunching to get done in time for that wedding. And Brian and his team, we did have Wildish, as the contractor doing the bid work, but as we talked about in September, a lot of things we struck off of that and put it on ourselves. And by ourselves, I mean Brian and team, to handle a lot of extras that saved us a fair amount of capital cost, but comes at the price of focusing on that and having to catch other things that are not parks related, made a scramble. But all in all, I think it was the right call, and knew our team could pull that off. So that's the bad part about being good at your job. You get asked to do more. So the next one in the blue, that's really the new content here, is just a summary of the 4 years about the project, that table. Just took right out of our general ledger, capital expenditures, and really only broke them into 3 categories. Design, engineering, project management, which includes survey work, all the civil work, all the utility design, and actually doing the bid process for us, the bid noticing, the bid evaluation, all of the contractual work that goes with that. And then the middle column is construction. That was the construction work that went out to bid. And then the city direct expenses are just that, are things that it's still capital, but it was done by us rather than jobbed out. And so the totals, the first 2 years were pretty much early design. That was, partly to get the grant. You have to do some design work to even be ready to have cost estimates to get the grant, and then some prep work for getting the bids going, and then really hit it full force in fiscal 24 and fiscal 25. Heavy, as to be expected, heavy on the design side first, some construction in that year. The city direct expenses is because we purchased the building. So the restroom itself falls into the city direct expense category. So we didn't contract out too much of that work. We did some for, I think there were some septic tank pieces and some electrical that we had to, by code, we are not allowed to do, because it's, we can work on public facilities. We can't work on the private property facilities. And then the following year, fiscal 25, is when, goes back to that table above, when we did the major bidding and got that construction work done. And then looking at the city direct expenses, we were really close to the total additional funding required that we described as needing additional city funding. We were able to really stick close to that. So I was pretty happy, really, when I look at this. And we talked about it before, that it was clearly over budget. A couple reasons. I think I hit that. I won't get there quite yet. The grant amount was $432,403, and we've spent $686,532. And kind of I think I hit it. I'm a little bit out of order, but I'll finish it, and then I'll go back to the park and tree recommendations. Under the budget and financial impacts is really where I hit the reason why we were over budget. And and we've talked about all of these before. These are nothing new, or 3 items, I guess. So the 4-year project span from initial concept and estimating to now, prices have gone up in every category imaginable on public projects. Well, private too, but especially public projects. We've seen that in our water projects, and we've talked about that at length. Then the second item, the necessary but under budgeted expenditures for design, engineering, project management. That's a higher percentage than I think had been used in the past. And I think that's something that we've adjusted to. We've also been really clear in our capital planning that we're doing that we're going to separate and call those out for council. So we're really clearly know when we're talking about what a construction cost is versus the total project cost. Because you all typically see a construction contract bid award, that isn't the total project. There's items out of there that, 30 to 40% of the project can be outside of construction. So we're trying to be really clear and cognizant that, that everybody is seeing that and knowing when we're talking about the subset that is construction versus the overall project. So that's one reason. Another reason it was over. And then I said that the higher than anticipated costs associated with the 2-room precast restroom structure. I think that happened soon after I got here, was in the process of happening. Absolutely think it's the right call. And I think it's smart. 2 stalls versus 1 means a lot more flexibility of the community events that are heavy use. So I think it makes sense all across, and it's the best thing we've got going for long-term maintenance there. So those were the really high level, higher than reasons why I think it was higher than anticipated. And but I put the bullets just below that. The bullets, just to remind, is we tend to talk about the negative and the, oh man, it costs a lot. But those bullets are the positives. It consumed more general fund resources and staff time than was anticipated, but the end result is an over 20% expansion of usable parkland that is actually owned by the city now, not kind of just kind of planned in handshake agreements to use every once in a while. Increased access and mobility to and through the park, ADA parking and accessible paths, increased on-street parking on Harrison, a new public restroom facility. So now we have one at Norma, 2-room, 2-stall there, and also here at Pavilion. So that increases our restroom capacity downtown, and increased safety and security with additional lighting and also electrical outlets that we will have less trip hazards and stuff where we can plug in different places for community events. So, and really, I think aesthetically, a really nice park. It'll be a few years of more than average weeding while that stuff grows in. But once it grows in, I think we'll be in really good shape with a manageable park. And we've also had some early assistance with volunteers really doing some great work. Some seeds, crazy amount of seeds came with that soil.
They always do.
Yeah.
it seems.
But we've got that initial run out of there. So that's kind of, before we go on to kind of the leftover pieces, primarily the fountain, before we get into that, and that leads into some of the park and tree recommendations. Any questions on kind of the overall project?
Just some comments about the park or questions about the park.
Sure.
So on that, well, where exactly will the fountain be potentially located if we do that project?
It's the spot
Right in
right.
front of the wall.
Yes, it's in that kind of
Little
football shaped
swale.
thing with the middle is kind of some not so great grass. It's
Okay.
not so great because we're reserving that. Yeah.
Yeah, I like the wall. I'd like to recommend that, there's a lot of mortar on that wall that never got muriatic acid on. Probably some of the stones are 25 to 50% mortar rather than rock. So somebody could take a look at that. The contractor probably should have come back with some muriatic acid to clean off that mortar, number one. And number two, you got any feedback on the gravel versus having had concrete or pavers for the walkways? And is that a maintenance item where weeds in that gravel or spreading out a lot into the grass? Or
So far, it's held up fairly nice and weed free.
It's been
And
compacted really well, and
Counselor Smith has some input
So
there.
when we were designing the park, one of the really strong feelings was that we not have more concrete, that the paths be soft.
Mhm.
We had originally talked about possibly decomposed granite or chips or whatever, but we were really steering away from hardscape.
So that you had a permeable surface
Yeah, we
rather
wanted a
than.
permeable, softer surface.
And it
Yeah.
still does meet, you know, it's compacted to a level to meet ADA, and it was specifically,
Right.
you know, chosen and spec'd out. And I would say that, you know, from an aesthetics and an occasional maintenance, we've talked about, you know, a little Zen raking every, you know, once or twice a season, to smooth out that top surface. And I would expect, you know, I don't know what, every 5 years, every, you know, every so many years, it will need a little bit of additional material, especially after it settles the first one. But, you know, the objective was still have it be wheelchair. That was a requirement actually of the grant, that it still be wheelchair accessible. And then also, aside from the aesthetics and all that, you know, the cost considerations, that would be a much larger project cost. The you know, per linear foot of concrete right now is, that would be a lot. You know, I don't know if that probably wasn't a primary driver of but it definitely would have changed our numbers on the project if they were paved. And pavers, you know, just from prior places and prior experience, those are, they're a great initial thing, but as a primary walking surface, they're a maintenance problem. They create unevens. They're not really good ADA even to start with. They have a lot more movement, you know, than you would ever hope for. So those are a challenge. You know, there's certain places where they work where they're bound in by other concrete, but I think the material choice is going to work out pretty well.
Okay, thank you.
But we'll follow up on that wall just to I know what you're talking about, the kind of the white oxidation kind of thing.
If I can jump in quickly just to add some ADA feedback, in terms of the permeable surface that the Park and Tree Committee were shooting for, I think it's probably the best possible surface. If you're shooting for something that is permeable and softer, I mean, it could always be better, but it's a happy marriage
Good,
between the two, I think.
good.
Thank you for
Excellent.
that input.
Yeah. There's no other questions. That's the fountain location is a great segue to the rest of it. That's been the fountain has been probably the topic of most discussion other than the overall project cost, and that's been debated, and I've been the I don't know what the Debbie Downer at Park and Tree Committee meetings, kind of trying to crack the door open to revisiting that. And partly from a cost perspective, we ran out of money, but also from a long-term operations and maintenance. And the mayor attended recent Park and Tree Committee together because we've been talking about you know, the costs on an annualized basis for such a feature, you know, eating into the revenue stream we just created for the park and open space fee that you all approved. And are there how much heartburn would there be for either delaying or just providing a window of time to let the project close and settle and think about, you know, maybe that still is the right thing at some point in time to have a water feature fountain of some sort, but let it marinate a little bit longer, and instead put a paver system as a secondary surface. I think you know, along the lines of what you were describing, to clean up that area and make it more usable than it is now, because it was intended. It's very uneven surface because we were planning to do something different, so it wasn't finished. So that was kind of the idea, was a paver surface to finish it out, clean it up aesthetically, make it look like it was intended or like it's on purpose, and buy time for either fundraising or you know, the idea of public art that maybe doesn't have water, you know, as still a placeholder for a prominent amenity. So that's the part where Councilor Smith, you know, can chime in too. We had several meetings where that was on the agenda with Park and Tree Committee to go over that. That was an initial, very strongly desired element. Maybe I'll defer and let you characterize how that went with the committee, because you have a longer term standing with the group. But ultimately, that's the recommendation. They were agreeable to a deferral, but
So when Parks and Tree worked with contractors and whatever, originally, the fountain was probably the key piece. So it was disappointing not to be able to, part of it was COVID, part of it was costs went up. Really disappointing not to be able to do the fountain. So after Mr. Hanks and the mayor, you know, it's not just the fountain, even though everything's in the ground, to be able to do it if we ever want it. The ongoing maintenance at this time with budgets is also a concern, and fountains are extremely expensive to maintain and a lot of work. So originally, the Parks Committee put a recommendation forward that in lieu of the fountain at this time, they would do a placeholder so that we could close the grant. And then at the last meeting, they kind of combined it. We had a presentation that was submitted through the Arts Committee for Main Streets. And that's in your, I think that's in your packet. That's the pictures. So instead of just having pavers, this was brought forward, and they were calling them totem poles, but they're not totem because there's no Native American significance to them. But the recommendation from the committee was to accept a donation of painted pillars to be installed as a placeholder at Pavilion Park. And so the Parks Committee was fine with this, and then it'll go through the process to see if it works to do that. So the hope is in the future that, you know, it's a placeholder so we could close the grant, but they were still going to research different types of fountains, maybe something less expensive, just, it's still out there, but agreed to set it aside for now.
one of the challenges with the fountain was we have a concept. There were some drawings and examples of things that, you know, liking it to function similar to. You know, Brian took several different runs at trying to get a cost estimate and get bids, and people weren't even willing to bid because we didn't have an actual drawn design, you know, and it's custom. So, like, well, it depends on how big you want it, what your foot, you know, there just wasn't any real ability to get bids. We ultimately got someone out there on site. Brian, I don't know how you twisted him, got him there, but and you know who they do that, you know, that scale and size. It's not really a residential size site, and it needs, you know, we also have the public in there, and there's lots of elements that are beyond a backyard water feature. And you know, in talking it through, excavating 2 or 3 feet down, doing everything that needs to be done with the various layers of different media that have to be in there, and how it really works, and structurally really need an engineer to actually, you know, people aren't supposed to climb on it, but you have to have it so it doesn't topple, and there's building code, there's a lot of things to it, pumps and all of that. So we ended up getting a kind of a napkin style, saying, hey, I can't bid you on this, but I can give you a range, and you'll need to have somebody draw it up, design it, engineer.
So we have to pay for
Five
the
to
engineering.
10,000, you know, $5,000 at least to do that. And then, you know, it's in the $40,000 range. You know, so we're talking between, you know, the range probably safely is $30,000 to $50,000 for just the fountain. And then we have pretty consistent maintenance requirements, you know, freezing, algae, vandalism, you name it, put it all in that bucket. I think it's safe to say that's a fair amount, and time of very limited, you know, we really devote, you know, about 0.5, 0.6 FTE to parks, and to add just for one amenity. So that was my, you know, our spiel, you know, and our waving it up saying, okay, that isn't a hard no, you know, that, you know, those are tough. Those are tough financials to overcome. Totally understanding the focus point and really what that meant to the project. But that kind of drove that conversation. And then, you know, as I put it in the staff report, this arts idea from the Arts Committee of Coburg Main Street, you know, can be a temporary installation. I think you know, Mayor talked about recent mayor's conference where many cities are decommissioning water features, and you see less and less of them from a maintenance standpoint, and they also age poorly. They're rough, even if they're working great for a few years. And public art is a very common amenity that isn't free from challenges of high initial cost. If you're doing an industrial scale, at truly public art, often has some of the same attributes. Engineering, it needs to withstand. It needs to be really carefully handled, and there has to be some maintenance agreements about how those actually get maintained. So the art is maintained, and they have to be truly public. So there's a public process that would need to be developed beyond what we have. So I think that also opens the door, and I think this temporary art installation that came through as a secondary opportunity to the Park and Tree, that they really, I think, pretty unanimously thought it was a great idea. I think it seeds that conversation whether a fountain is the right long-term thing there, or not necessarily this, but this gives some kind of some scale and some kind of thought to what would be the right thing there in the long term. So from a staff perspective, we have some, there'll be some challenges working with before the donation. There's a donation process. Before the donation, we'll have some conversations with them about sturdiness, attachments, because it's donated to the city, and it becomes a city installation and a city responsible thing and city liability thing. So there's plenty of steps still, but I think conceptually the Park and Tree Committee was very for it, and I think from our standpoint, it fits right along with what we were wanting to kind of have some breathing room to kind of explore how we want that to look long term.
I have one question. I know that, am I correct in that we forfeited 4,000 from the grant because we couldn't do the fountain?
Don't know exactly yet if that's accurate. So the fountain, public art doesn't count in the grant, so we can't swap it for that.
That's my question.
Yeah, we can't swap it. You've asked that question. The water feature was a listed item in the grant for a relatively small dollar amount. That was pretty disproportionate to what was being considered. We're working with Oregon Parks Rec. They've been very amenable to how we've swapped around as the project has evolved. About some things cost more than what were on that list. Some things actually, a few things cost less than what were on the early estimate. And they've told us, as we've heard in other grant stuff, that everybody is having the same problem, that, how do we finish this out when these things that we said cost this much cost wildly more? And then how do you right size that? So they've been very amenable to things, and I don't have a final answer on what we may be foregoing. I think at most we would be foregoing 4,000 of that 432,000 if when we don't go with the fountain. I'm hopeful that the pavers could be categorized as a base component of a fountain, and it contributes to that. So then that would be off of that 4,000. That's not for sure yet. So we're still working to really maximize the reimbursement. We're on the final retainage part of the reimbursement. We've gotten 90% back, so it's 43,000 that gets withheld, regardless of how much money we have left. 43,000 gets withheld as the last 10% till it's complete. We've spent down more than that. But we're close to figuring out where that puts us on the reimbursement side. So yeah, out of the 432, we've gotten 380 or 390 or so over both fiscal years, the prior fiscal years.
Mr. Lehman?
If you ever do really consider some kind of a fountain, I would just encourage you to look at McGrath's in Salem. Their entranceway, they have some really big rocks with water cascading, not a lot of water pool or anything, but it has some dramatic water action.
There's a lot of discussion about what was originally intended and what different options are, kind of concrete basalt pillars, more of a CMU block with a rock face, more what you just described. I think that's part of the challenge from our standpoint, was what is most available without doing significant engineering work and kind of custom like landscape architect engagement is what you're describing. There was some some pushback that that wasn't what was originally envisioned. So I think giving us more time probably means we end up with a little mini design process for whatever ends up being there. Won't be picked by us, for sure. Won't be picked by us. It will be involving Park and Tree and obviously council when we get to that spot, or we engage in a public art kind of process.
And John, to speak to your idea, when the idea was put forward, we had photos is all. We didn't have any engineered anything, but the idea was to have a concave wall that would block the noise from the street and just create a quiet spot there by that wall. And there was going to be a bench on the other side. And it was originally the original plan was for it to be a curved wall that had a rock face, kind of a weeping wall. So that was the original.
6 feet tall, about 10 feet on the curve is the stuff that I was just looking at. Yeah. So really significant, you know,
It's pretty specific. They
yeah.
voted to accept that design, but then.
Not a happy wall, a weeping wall.
And Lana Meston was the one that put that forward because she had been somewhere that they had one and she just felt that it would be really nice to have a quiet spot in the park for people that just wanted to sit, and it was just going to be kind of its own little section.
One benefit, I think, of deferring, aside from we don't have the funding yet, is that we now have the scale. We have the actual site. So we're not looking at a site plan. We can put poles up and say, what would 6 feet look like, 6 foot by 10, and how much would that obscure? Does that change people sitting on that wall not being able to see through to the pavilion structure and events? Is that good? Is that bad? Is that, how would you want to orient it? Is a cascading down in height, better? I think that there's value in having the space really already etched out, so that the scale is more easily kind of visualized by everyone when we're getting there. And likewise, is there something from a sensory perspective as an alternative to water that still meets some of that sensory desires? And I think, yeah.
To be something calming and a sensory
Yeah.
experience of some kind.
Lots of ideas.
Lots of ideas.
Counselor Bowman?
Question for Counselor Smith. Perhaps you can provide some insight. Has the Shepherd family provided some additional feedback as to what they would find acceptable? Because I know they were involved with this project to a pretty significant extent.
Well, at the ribbon cutting, they were interested in helping to make donations toward a fountain if that's what we chose to do. And then I don't know, I think there's been conversations too with the city, but
They
nothing.
didn't really have a vested interest in a fountain.
Good to know.
They're not going to be
Right.
disappointed or feel like they have been deceived if we don't do a fountain.
And more to come on
Good to know.
more to come on the Shepherd family. When we're done with this part, we'll hit that topic.
I do want to bring up the very beginning of this project and how it was kind of laid out. I think this has gotten lost under the bed, if you will. When we first started down the road of lining out what we wanted, and then attaching price to each one of those amenities, the selection process for the Oregon Parks and Rec grant process is very extensive. There was, if I remember back, it started off with a list of 72. We made the 16. We had to go do a presentation on the park and what we were after. And even though the land swap was a big one of the deciding factors for Oregon Parks and Rec granting us the funds, it was also, we weren't asking for very much, right? So it made that process a little bit easier for them to select this project. If we would have said, well, the restroom is a 2-stall restroom and it's $120,000 and we want $60,000 for a fountain, we could have priced ourselves out of this project altogether.
Yeah.
So, I mean, at the end of the day, even though we were over budget, and, you know, we could probably debate on whether we could have seen that coming or not. If we would have went forward with a bigger ask, it's very possible that we wouldn't have gotten the project selected.
Really good point. Yeah, thank you for that.
Great input. Thank
Yep.
you for that.
Yeah, so with that, I could segue over to the Shepherd family part, because that does get to the land swap and really their more focused asks or connection to the park itself. And that is, you know, I can recap really quickly. That land there was appraisals done for that land, and the land behind, where are we, this way, kind of over here. And that the differential in the two appraisals was about $40,000. So the land was swapped, and the differential, the Shepherd family agreed to that as a donation. So it was a donation formally for that differential. And with that, and it's in the packet, is the agreements that there's a resolution that created that swap or property transfer and the donation. And that also then had an agreement with it. And the agreement, it's stated in a lot of different documents, slightly different ways. But I think in talking with everybody, and when I was trying to get my head around what was the intent and what were the words there, was a renaming. There's talking about a renaming of a portion, there's talking about a memorial, and then there was the kind of the ability or the right of the Shepherd family to work with Park and Tree Committee and then ultimately council on a renaming of the park. And to get to Councilor Bowman's question that the mayor hit on a little bit, the part that they are not as committed to anything really aesthetically with the fountain. I think they like the concept, as Councilor Smith said, but the core exchange there was the renaming. So that also has been talked about multiple times with Park and Tree Committee, and the mayor and I met with Shepherd family representatives to kind of work through what what they thought to be the plan. And they reiterated the plan in their eyes was that it was a renaming. And they also there's a memorial plaque or a bronze or like a single post pedestal thing that will be somewhere in the park that was also part of that property agreement.
On page 20, if you want to look
thank you.
at the agreement, addendum A.
There we go.
Page
Yep.
20 in the packet.
Yeah, it's stated in that addendum A on page 20. There's also a reference in the primary exchange agreement, but and then there's a lot of different conversations in email and in Park and Tree Committee minutes, kind of all similar language, but not quite. Nothing super empirical, but what we go by is the contracts and our conversations with Shepherd family. Ultimately, what their proposal kind of a little bit wordsmith with the mayor and I involved with them talking about kind of what makes the most sense for all parties, hopefully, was Laura Park at the Pavilion. Including the at the Pavilion really kind of linked the two together. Shepherd family felt really strongly that made sense to them too. It wasn't a compromise. It was a, hey, yeah, that does make sense. And Park and Tree Committee had the same feeling. They felt that's appropriate. And the sign, the monument sign, the ground sign that's part of the project, it's going to be installed any day, probably this week, next week. Has Laura Park at the Pavilion, and then the framing of it actually has kind of the pavilion roof structure to it. So kind of another little homage to the pavilion structure that ties that all together. So that formally is a resolution to rename the park. We don't have a policy. A lot of cities have a policy about what kind of the parameters or the characteristics of what names are available and that kind of thing. We don't have one. That's not the end of the world. I think we're fine. I think it's most processes involve any city's parks committee, or, it's a very normal thing to have it go through an advisory body and then to council and then enacted and memorialized through a resolution. So there's a couple things when we finish up that I'll ask for kind of staff direction on, that based on some of the recommendations of the Park and Tree and staff. And that's one of them is the renaming and having a resolution either in November or December council meeting to formalize that name change.
Councilor Lehman?
Probably a whole process of itself is the location of the sign.
That was talked about with Park and Tree Committee.
Already
Yep.
done.
And
The location is, this one's the original. It would be really, it's kind of where the
maybe where the ice cream sandwich board is.
it's a little further south of that. Yep. Brian's got it right there. So it's a little bit, there was quite a bit of really good discussion about that at Park and Tree. And that's where we took their lead on that, and everybody went and looked at it individually. But it's, as you look at the mound, it's tilted a little bit towards the intersection. So when you're coming from those directions, if you're straight on to North Willamette, you really don't see it till you're next to it. So it's angled a little bit. So you see it coming in on North Willamette, and it's a little bit up that mound, about a third of the way up that mound with a backdrop of the trees and shrub. I think it's got kind of wider base columns to it, and then just some posts there. So
Nice to have some lighting there that we can too.
we don't have electrical out in that spot. That would be a later thing.
You can actually get some pretty strong solar lights too.
Yep,
Yeah.
that's an option if we appropriately cage, lock, and secure them. So solar lights have a tendency to walk away. Yeah,
In our
But-
yards.
but
they
yes,
do.
agreed. I think it'll look really, really sharp in that location. And that was designed and actually paid, the entirety is another Shepherd family thing, that part of the project they're handling. With our review and the actual sign design was brought forward to Park and Tree. They've been great. Shepherds have been great to kind of be sharing that process as it goes through.
Park and Tree. Spell change.
Yeah, really good aesthetic improvements, I thought. So that's kind of Pavilion, and I'll recap really the staff direction and acceptance of the Park and Tree, so we can move forward. If there's agreement from council and on pavers, and that would probably happen in late winter, early spring, pavers in that location. And then acknowledgement, I guess there's no acceptance, the donation of that pillar art would come later when we're further down the path. That would actually be a donation to the city. You'll see that there at that time. And then an upcoming resolution for the name change to Laura Park at the Pavilion. So that's how we're kind of planning to march forward, but that was a recommendation from the committee, but also wanting to make sure that there's staff direction from council to march in that direction. If that's agreeable to everybody.
Any naysayers, and seems reasonable
Good.
to me.
Well, I appreciate that, and I really appreciate Park and Tree Committee's work. I know Brian really handled, and worked with them on the early end. We kind of shared it in the middle, and then I'm kind of doing the end part. So, and they've been there steady throughout. So, and I know it takes a lot of patience to deal with changes that come up and the time that it takes. So, but all in all, I've been really happy with their engagement and the improvements that they make when we bring things forward. So.
As I look at the conceptual site plan dated 22 from the landscape architect, I mean, there've been significant changes, morphs. I mean, at one point there had been a suggestion that there would be a mural on the existing building or to block the I mean, they're great ideas, but they are concepts. And I think with any building project that I've ever been involved in, and I would guess the same is for everybody here, we have concepts starting out, and then we go, yeah, that probably isn't going to work very well. So, I know people get caught up in that initial picture, and that's what they have in their minds. But I think it looks great, and they've done a really good job. I think it's a project that we will be very proud of, for many years to come.
And there's still more good things to come, like the
Yes.
tables and stuff. There's
Yep.
still some things out there we're thinking of. You know, one of the things they've discussed is maybe going to the businesses to see if businesses would like to donate a table, and we'll put their QR code on the table where you can order. Because the whole idea originally was to expand that business area into the park. So there's still some fun things out there that a donation process.
And I know I threw this staff report at you right at the meeting. You didn't have time to read it first, but I did make a little note in there about a fundraising campaign that we're working with Coburg Main Street on to try and
Yeah.
kickstart some of those other amenities and really that fine tuning. Yeah, it really, aside from being a great community asset, it is an economic development tool. It differently, I think, a little bit differently than the other parks in the system. So it's, I think we treat it differently when we're talking maintenance. I think that's, it's a real asset. And I echo the mayor's comments. I think the improvements that were made are long-term sturdy, improvements. They're not flimsy, 5-10 year, and then you have to scratch your head and go, now what? Those are really, I think, bode well for the future.
Thanks to Brian for the restroom
Yep.
That was-
conversation.
We get a little, maybe a Brian Harmon plaque on the
No.
restroom on the back door or something.
No,
The service door to the restroom.
yeah, no.
Saved your bacon on that. Say
That
that.
was
Yep.
huge. That
Yep.
was a huge
deal.
financial commitment
Yep.
to do that.
Thanks. Wow.
That price just went up exponentially.
But
Yeah.
I agree wholeheartedly. It's a really good asset.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
You did
You're
Have
welcome.
no
take a lot of
idea.
slings and arrows.
So the other item I have is just an update. It's really early on. We had a conversation at Park and Tree about it just last week and wanted to put this in front of council, just mostly as an FYI. That this is kind of how we're framing things up for how we want to process.
Where to
Oh,
look
it
in the
is
packet.
page 24.
Okay, thank you.
So it's the new neighborhood park. This is the land that, the two separate parcels that came with each phase of Coburg Creek subdivision. It's about 30,000 square feet?
Yeah, 28, yeah.
30,000.
Mhm.
Two-thirds of an acre.
Mhm.
So I looked at the open space master plan. There's it's slightly larger than a mini park and slightly smaller than a neighborhood park. It fits in this no man's land it's weird. The chart left a gap and this land area fits right in that gap that they didn't identify. Kind of calling it a neighborhood park. I think that's probably, 24 and 25. And so we've you may have all heard from residents. We've talked about it a little bit that it's again, it's a funding thing that's those that we've reached full build out there. We have full occupancy of all the new homes. It's looking great, and they have desires for that to as quickly as possible turn into a completed park. We will need to be very creative and strategic about how we go about it. We had a great conversation at Park and Tree that, they hit on all the elements that were in my head before I even popped it out there about, using the Parks and Open Space Master Plan as the kind of the starter kit guide, that it's in addition to our park system. And, these kind of things are 30+ year planning horizons that you look at when you're building new parks, any new asset, and that the neighborhood impact input is important, but community input is equally important because it's neighbors change, the community evolves, and we have to look at what do we already have in our system? Proximity to this land. Is it complementary? Do you do same amenities, same place? So we really were talking about how do we start that conversation? Because it's actually, the mayor was with us once or twice, and we've been out staff meeting with some of the neighbors, and even amongst the 10 or 15 that we've talked to, wildly different desires. Some are saying, I want this, and others are saying, I want anything but this, and it happens to be the same thing, so that's hard. I think it's really, I think our best bet is methodical. And so this this memo is trying to laying out, kind of using what we typically use in more public works infrastructure projects, is this idea of chunks of plan design. You start at the zero, we're at the zero spot. So this 0 to 30%, getting to a concept plan, kind of like, as the mayor mentioned with Pavilion, that getting to that concept plan first, that gets you a very broad view of things. And having that stage one, I kind of laid out who is the primary driver of each of these stages and what happens in each of the stages. In stage one, the committee felt concurred with that it probably makes sense, since they're most familiar with the master plan, they're most familiar with the pros and cons of developing Johnny Diamond. Along, obviously, Brian has a lot of history. They'll be at the table on the staff part of working with Park and Tree. What has worked well? What didn't work well? What kind of features does the master plan call out? And kind of get at least an initial laundry list of likely amenities that might make sense, and also take into consideration the scale of the property, how much you can really fit there. Do that work first, do that 0 to 30. And then at that stage two is that 30 to 60%. That's where you take these pretty broad concepts, you throw them out there and get people's reaction to them. And that's really where that community engagement would start. And I think Councilor Smith could add on to what was talked about of do you start with, hey, we've got this much money, or do you start with, hey, anything you want, put it down. This idea of using this model really helps constrain it without being absolute. It says, here is our best, our people that have the most context to a parks system, and here's a starter kit to start playing with and molding and shaping. So that 30 to 60% helps, open house, community survey, that kind of thing, and saying, hey, here's some thoughts, and here's why we thought this. What do you all think? A little more deeper than that, but basically that's the idea at that second stage. And then stage three is really where it gets remolded a little bit or refined by the Park and Tree Committee. And then that's where the baton handoff starts to happen a little bit more to staff, as you start figuring, okay, where does it actually fit? What are the rules? What are the codes? What are the costs, to put things together the way they've been designed and conceptualized. But there's still a lot of back and forth on that baton between Park and Tree, maybe another round of community input. That's where council probably gets its first, chance to mess with it. And then that you get to a 90% design based on that round of refinement. Then really it's almost for sure in staff's hands. That 90 to 100 is really all of the code details, the bid details, the phasing, all of those elements, what order they have to happen in, to make it happen. So this is just kind of a heads up to, this is kind of how we're thinking about going about it. And then the very final piece, which may not be welcome timeline to all, but how we think it probably, again, on the methodical stepping forward, how we can actually do it and meet, a budget that we decide on that we can actually fund. There is always an opportunity for grant applications. I think that's going to be harder for this particular project. I don't see it as a super compelling grant funded thing, but we'll be looking. And we've kicked around some ideas, and I know Park and Tree is kind of thinking similarly, that it's sometimes simpler can be better. It doesn't have to have everything in it. It can't. Anyway, even if we had the money, it can't fit everything. So I'm really encouraged by what Park and Tree has already thought of as kind of the outer, starter kit, and just wanted to put this in front and take any comment we have, from council early on, and really recognizing that, some of the neighborhood is going to want it to maybe move faster, but this gives us the chance to build it out. I think the way that even to phase it, I made a note, it's possible that we don't just have a landscape architect and bid it, that we do some intermediate. Brian's got some ideas, and we're kind of kicking around costs of getting it in a more usable shape earlier. And that's where I put in that stage two, in that time range, that again, that would come back to council, whether we expend funds. We want to make sure that if we expend funds, it's in pursuit of the desired final product rather than trying to do something and go, man, yeah, that bought us a year, but we have to trash it and that money was not well spent. And there is a chance that this could work where we act as kind of the project managers and basically the general, and we just sub it ourselves, and we don't bid out a complete project. We bid out irrigation, we bid out some grading, we bid out some landscaping, and handle it that way. And I think there's some, by again, methodical, I think we have more of an opportunity to do that, contain costs, and still get a really solid end product.
Counselor Smith?
One of the things too that the Parks Committee was really aware of and that will help drive the design is looking at landscaping, maintenance, and what's going to be required. And then also, like Adam said, you know, an end result. It may be that after we get through this process, we know what it's going to look like in the end, but there will be phases that will happen. So it won't be, bam, we're all done, here it is. It may go in phases. We also found out from the surveys we took when we did Johnny Diamond that by the time we got the park done, population had changed. And the wants had changed. So to kind of balance a park that doesn't recreate what we already have, and that also is really sensitive to the amount of maintenance it will take. There was a lot of talk about just a lot more open usable space.
When you walk through that neighborhood or go through that neighborhood, what I see, and many of you may have seen the same thing, is that those are not big lots.
No.
They're not like, go out in the backyard and play lots. So the thought of an open space is makes sense to me. But we'll see.
When I've walked through there, I've seen people sitting out along the edge of the park, and their kids are riding bikes and just run around making their own fun, basically. But there was a lot of kids riding bikes, and the parents were just all sitting there visiting, and they could see the kids, and they were in there with bikes and cruising from this big all the way up. So
And the phase process, and I think we've learned that through the last several years, that phase process just makes sense. It allows us to sort of say, well, this now seems like a good idea, or as you said, nah, yeah, it seemed like a good idea initially, but now we're kind of moving in a different direction.
and I think we've learned that with Johnny Diamond.
Yes, I would certainly
The
agree
needs
with
for what that park is used for have
Yeah.
probably nothing that we thought they would be right now.
which then entails taking down things that you thought would work
And that's
initially.
what Adam
And
had
that's-
mentioned too, is, we want to have a long range plan, but it'll be usable, but done in phases.
Makes sense to me. Counselor Bowman?
I concur with you, Maribel, and Councillor Smith. The phase process, while it is slower, and that is not necessarily popular or what people want, it does make sense. It is more efficient to be deliberate and to make sure that we have a clear process in place and a clear vision to execute that process. And I will be frank that not everybody will get what they want with this park. And that's a reality that we have to accept. We will do our best to engage and accommodate as many interests as we can that makes sense. But inevitably, a certain percentage of the wants and desires will wind up being disappointed. And that's how it works with capital projects like this.
It was interesting when we went out and met with community members that live in that neighborhood. as Adam said, you know, some were saying, well, we want this and this, and others were saying, no, 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 we don't want any trees in there because you see how many people come out and look at the sunset from here? We don't want trees blocking that. We don't. So, yeah, you're absolutely correct. It's going to be a process.
Well, and one of the other things we talked about in that process was that initially the ideas stayed in the smaller group, like with parks and with staff. But important to have your ears on and listen to what people are suggesting, and hopefully we can generate ideas that will come. But just so people know, if they say they want it, it's like, well, there's no promises, but
We'll see what we can
that's
do.
an idea. But if those get passed on to the city or to the council or to parks, then that kind of helps guide us without a formal, you get what you want, you know.
Well, add real quick, we had, we didn't necessarily plan this, but we got a kickstart on this engagement process. As you probably know, every year we have 3 Fridays where we have the charter school. They do a unit on government and they come in on Fridays. Last week was the first Friday, and Sammy and I were a bit of a scramble. How are we gonna? What are we gonna do with them? So what we ended up doing was a little mini design charrette. I don't know if you've heard the word charrette. Charrette is a land use planning typical process to do exactly this. So we broke about 30 or so student, 8th grade students. We talked about what services the city provides and the variety of things, talked about the difference between a fire district and a fire department and police and all that stuff. And then talked about parks. That's one thing that, you know, that's a service and a community, you know, asset that we provide, and broke them into 4 groups, gave them a big drawing of the parcel, and said, before we went into groups, we said, make a list of, they're all experts at parks, right? They have 8th graders. They've been to many, probably more parks than we have. So we said, just call out list, you know, amenities. So we came up with a list of, Madison helped write it down. There's like 40 different amenities, right? The zip lines, you know, restrooms, and, you know, everything, all great stuff. And they said, okay, now you have a master list. Now there's 4 stations, get into 6 or 7 people per group, and design a park. And so they took the markers, and so I've got them up at the office. We'll organize them and take pictures, but it will be something that we provide to Park and Tree, and not everybody, you know, it turned out really cool. They had some amazing stuff. Obviously it's not scaled drawings, but we talked about how much can actually fit, what, you know, try to visualize. I think one side it's like 80 or 120 by 200 or something like that, you know, 200 length. Well, can you fit a football field? Can you fit a pickleball court? How much actually fits there? One of the groups talked about, we need ADA. And so 8th graders knew, you know, and we need a dog station. Do we have a dog park in Coburg? Yes, no. Do we have some, there was very healthy discussion about all the different amenities, and some of the same stuff that we're going to be, well, almost all of the same stuff will be talked about with Park and Tree and the community. So an impromptu head start on from an 8th grade perspective about what would make sense. And we didn't, of course, worry about the money part. There were some fairly extravagant items in there as well. But anyway, it just happened to be a really good exercise. And it's actually I think it'll be valuable. It'll be useful.
It would be really neat to do some sort of, I think, coloring contest, but that's not what you want. But it would be really neat to maybe, before we even start this process, have something where we say, hey, pick this, you know, pick up a piece of paper at City Hall and design your favorite park. What would it be? I think that kids have, like Adam.
And that was the
they're
exercise,
the ones
really.
that
Yeah.
use it.
Mhm.
If we did that citywide, I think that, you know, a lot of it we wouldn't be able to use, but you just never know. And then if some kid sees a part of that park that is their idea, that gives ownership and pride. And
There's other, you know, that and survey, you know, when we get to the right spot, you know, I think the conversation really was, you know, Park and Tree has the best baseline knowledge of the master plan and of prior parks and all that stuff. So get a starter kit there, but then get that out there and say, of all of this, put the puzzle piece, what's your preferred way of putting this together? I think others, there's other tools with the community survey. You can do word clouds and see what resonates the most out of the whole list of 80 amenities that maybe people talk about. What 5 were the most prevalent? There's a lot of different ways to try and filter, and again, have to be careful that input isn't a directive. We're not just taking, but it's taking it into account by the recommending body and then the decision-making body. And then we provide the stuff around the edges to say what it takes and what it costs, and some of the maintenance, pros and cons of the things. But yeah, I think there's a lot of different tools, and
If it was a creative process and I think that includes our kids up through middle school especially, if it was a creative process where if you put in an entry, your name is if you put in an entry, your name gets drawn and you get a mini pizza from Coburg Pizza, or you get a whatever.
A
I mean,
lollipop.
you do a drawing and give a couple of prizes. I think just encouraging the input sounds exciting.
I told them,
We can recruit them to be fundraisers too.
We could.
I told them to come, they could, by the time they're driving, this park should be done, so they can come check it out. They'll see what their park turned into. So anyway, just wanted to add that it was those kind of things. That one just happened. We had 30 captive 8th graders where we didn't have to go beg them to do it. It was required.
And they loved it.
And they
didn't
did. Yeah, it was great. Yeah.
Good. Now, those 8th graders are so smart.
Yep.
I swear they get smarter.
They were great. They were really funny. They were really funny and energized. Yep.
Okay, any council input questions? Not, we've hit all the agenda items.
Yep.
Okay. We ready to adjourn?
Just really quick, I wanted to thank the mayor for this sip and chat document. It's great. I think you did a really great job on summarizing the budget issues and laying it out in a way that is easy to understand, and it's all the high points. So thank you so much for
Well,
doing
thank
that
you.
and having the meetings.
I didn't do it alone, trust me. It was a group effort as always. But I've done 2 sessions with community members. I had 2 people at each session, but I also had a couple of people say, I meant to be there, but on my meeting prior didn't end on time. So there is interest. Several of the people said, this is really great, and I will be talking to my neighbors. So the information will get carried forward. I'm planning on doing at least one more session in November on a Saturday, so that people that are still working outside the home can hopefully attend. And I think that will be the 15th of November, and tentatively looking at having it at the Commons.
Well, that's probably a good thing that it's indoors for the 15th of November.
Yes, that is part of the planning process. And then from that point, I'll sort of see, the holidays kind of get in the way. But probably in the first of the year, we'll do some more community meetings. And I think Adam sent out the document that you were mentioning, and certainly feel free to talk with your neighbors about it. You are all also important in this process and knowledgeable about the challenges that we face and the difficulty in making the decisions that you're being asked to make. And I do really appreciate all of you as council. These are difficult decisions. These are decisions when we talk about rates and we talk about, new fees or increasing fees. These are not easy. We know that they impact each and every person within this community, including ourselves, but it is hard. I appreciate that you come prepared and that you come with an understanding and good questions, and that is appreciated. With that, I'll get off my soapbox. And adjourn this work session meeting at 7:14. Thank you.
You betcha.
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Best to do that.